The Watchers call. From the darkness, we observe.
4,000 psychers in containment, and the umbral penitent maintains absolute silence. This impossibility defines my current assignment as Sergeant Scribe Matthias Caney, 47th Cadian Shock, pressed into service aboard a black ship that defies every protocol I know. In 17 years of Imperial Guard service, across 12 campaigns and 4 previous black ship escorts, I have never encountered such an abomination. Black ships scream. They bleed warp whispers through hull plating, their cargo of damned souls howling through psychic dampening fields that strain like overstretched cables. The sanguine penitents made my teeth ache from psychic pressure. The crimson absolution wept condensation that tasted of copper and despair. These vessels carry the Emperor's tithe to Terra, and they sing with the agony of 4,000 minds pressed against containment barriers. The umbral penitent is silent as a tomb. My scribe training demands documentation of this anomaly, while my guard experience screams warnings my rational mind cannot yet process. The moment I stepped aboard 3 days ago at Mordian Station, the absence struck like a physical blow. Where psychic emanations should press against my skull, there is nothing. Where the superstructure should thrum with barely contained warp power, I hear only recycled air and distant plasma drives. The corridors stretch in Gothic symmetry, black iron walls inscribed with standard litanies of binding and protection. But servo skulls drift through passages like mechanical ghosts, their auspex sensors sweeping for psychic disturbances that never manifest. The ship's chronometers disagree about time like old men about saints. My wrist slate shows third watch, while corridor relays insist on second. A bulkhead repeater near the torpedo lift scrolls numbers that shuffle and return unchanged, as if the ship practices forgetting. I time my breath to the drive thrum and feel it stutter between beats. Temperature slides down 2 degrees without explanation. Frost takes the railings in lace that refuses to melt. And when Private Joran taps the ice with his bayonet, shards rise and hang suspended, turning their edges toward us like curious insects. This morning brought news that felt like a death sentence. Ship's Astropath Vex Terminus reported our scheduled warp translation delayed indefinitely due to temporal anchor complications. When pressed for clarification, his augmetic voice box produced only static, and his organic eye wept tears that fell upward to the ceiling. I have begun security rounds with renewed attention, my training demanding documentation of every impossibility. The bulkhead's sweat condensation that defies gravity, droplets forming and flowing upward in perfect streams toward ventilation grills. Personal chronometers run at different speeds depending on location within the ship. Forward sections gain time, while aft compartments lose it. The ship's blessed central chronometer displaying multiple hours simultaneously on brass faces that shift as I observe them. During my 3rd patrol cycle, I discovered something that violates every regulation governing black ship operations. In the Sanctum Imperialis, the ship's primary chapel where crew gather for daily observances, a single ceremonial candle stood upon the altar. The item is impossible. Black ships carry no ceremonial candles, no open flames, no objects providing comfort to damned cargo. Yet there it stands, unlit but somehow present, as if it had always existed. Despite my certain knowledge, the altar was bare yesterday. The candle is black wax, its surface inscribed with high Gothic script my scribe training allows partial deciphering. The words speak of binding and release, of time held in suspension, of watchers maintaining vigil across impossible distances. The final line, carved in letters requiring close examination, states, "When the last candle burns, the observer becomes the observed." I circle it with last rifle raised, recording everything. The deck feels warm around the candle, cold elsewhere, warmth pulsing gently like a sleeping heart. My vox, crackles with a data burst from the astropath, words forced through mechanical relay, translation window cancelled, temporal anchor complications unresolved, hold position in real space until further ordnance. Emperor shield you. The last line is non-standard. I file that concern and tag the choir vault for investigation. Telemetry feeds my slate in stuttering blocks. Humidity rising. Gravity variance negligible. Chronometer drift accelerating. I request bridge confirmation. Binary chimes return 3 tones, neither affirmation nor denial, a mechanical shrug that settles like ice in my stomach. I open an evidence sack, sanctified paper with cog and skull watermark, and reach toward the candle with gloved fingers. Heat breathes across my hand, not from the wick, but from air above it, as if someone exhales there. I withdraw. Private Licks takes pick captures that return showing only empty space where the candle should be, equipment registering the shadow, but not the source. I taste iron on my tongue as the deck trembles once, like muscle cramp in a leviathan. The Vox grid above the altar crackles to life. Not sound at first, but its opposite, like a door opening onto vacuum, a pulling that tightens skin around my eyes. Then a breath, small and sure as any Hab child before curfew. A voice follows, high and careful, reciting the litany of binding as every schola teaches, each clause measured, each holy name precise. Only the order is wrong. The words step backward, invocation to preface, ending before beginning, amen before plea. We freeze. The candle stays dark. The voice concludes with the opening line, and silence reclaims the ship. 4 hours after the child's reversed litany echoed through the Sanctum Imperialis, I descended toward the containment levels with the impossible silence pressing against my skull like a physical weight. The elevator cage shuddered through layers of cold that numbed my teeth, then inexplicably warmed as we passed Deck 17. My auspex displayed psychic readings so perfectly flat they resembled a death line on a Medicae monitor. In 17 years of guard service across 12 campaigns, I had never encountered such an abomination of natural law. Black ships scream. Their cargo of 4,000 damned souls should bleed warp whispers through every bulkhead, making teeth ache and dreams writhe with borrowed nightmares. The environmental anomalies intensified as I moved deeper into the ship's belly. Condensation formed in perfect droplets along the bulkheads, then flowed upward in defiance of gravity, streaming toward ventilation grills like liquid seeking the ceiling. My chronometer disagreed with corridor displays by increasing margins. Forward sections gained time while aft compartments lost it, the ship's internal temporality fracturing along incomprehensible lines. The deck plates beneath my boots pulsed with a 3-beat rhythm, firm, weak, absent. Step, step, stumble, step, step, stumble. As if the umbral penitent itself had developed an arrhythmic heartbeat. Sister Vexia awaited me at the warded portal to containment level Gamma 7, her bronze cuirass gleaming under lumens that flickered in sympathetic triplets. Sisters of Silence communicate through sacred sign cont, their vocal cords sealed by ancient oaths. She raised 2 fingers, then 3, then pressed her palm flat against her gorget. 5 vault clusters to inspect, 3 power fluctuations detected, 1 critical anomaly. The air around her felt bruised and thin, psychic energy attenuating in her presence like sound through vacuum. I had worked with null maidens before. Their pariah fields create blessed poison to warp filth, making psychic static fragment and die. Here, her field changed nothing. The silence ignored her completely, and that impossibility unnerved me more than any scream. We keyed the portal with my scribe access codes. The blast door iris opened with a hydraulic hiss that died too quickly, swallowed by the oppressive quiet beyond. Rows of containment cells stretched into darkness, hexagonal coffins of blessed adamantine, inset with copper ward traceries. Each viewport showed opaque quartz thick enough to contain a demon prince. designed to suggest shapes within while preventing direct psychic contact. I braced for the usual pressure, the muffled chorus of fists against barriers and minds pressed to breaking. Nothing came. I approached the nearest cell and peered through the viewing port, angling my data slate to record everything. The psyker within hovered motionless above his restraint cot, manacles loose around wrists that should have been straining against blessed iron. His chest showed no rise or fall of breath, his skin displaying the slack pallor of deep sleep. But his eyes, Emperor, preserve my sanity. His eyes tracked my movement with desperate intelligence. His lips parted as if forming words, but no breath fogged the quartz barrier. This was not psychic suppression. This was surgical absence, the very concept of voice extracted from reality like a tumor. Sister Vexia moved beside me, her sign cant precise despite the tremor in her gauntleted fingers. She indicated her null field was active but ineffective, then signed a query I had never seen from a sister. What power could ignore the Emperor's silence? Her pariah aura should render any psyker unconscious within moments, yet these subjects remained conscious, aware, trapped in voiceless observation. We advanced through the containment maze, documenting the impossible. Cell after cell revealed motionless figures suspended between life and death. A woman in tattered hive worker clothing pressed her palm to the viewport, fingers splayed in silent communication. A child, perhaps 12 years old, wept tears that climbed his cheeks and vanished into his hairline. An elderly man beat bloodied fists against his cell door with mechanical repetition, impacts making no sound despite visible force. The pattern that emerged chilled my blood despite the containment level's unnatural warmth. Every cell wall bore carved tally marks, always groups of 12 with 11 scratched out by harsh diagonals. The marks appeared fresh, despite being cut into blessed adamantine, identical regardless of the prisoner's age or psychic discipline. Child and adult, sanctioned psyker and wild talent, all had carved the same desperate mathematics into their confinement. I accessed a maintenance terminal with my scribe clearance, Sister Vexia's servo skull, interfacing with the ship's data core through blessed mechadendrites. The logs revealed modifications that violated every principle of reality. Extensive retrofitting had been performed by Tecmago's Vex Terminus over 6 months, installing temporal anchor arrays and psychic null matrices using components absent from any standard template construct. The work orders bore authentic cipher seals and genetic authentication codes. The impossibility lay in the dates. Tecmagos. Vex Terminus had died 3 months before the modifications began, his death certificate filed with the Adeptus Mechanicus, his remains interred on Forge World Lucius according to sacred rite. Sister Vexia's auspex detected structural anomalies behind what appeared to be solid bulkhead. She indicated a specific point with 2 fingers, then made the sign for hidden space. Using her power maul, she struck the metal with precision born of centuries' training. The adamantine rang like a funeral bell, then slid aside to reveal a chamber that should not exist. Ancient technology filled the hidden space, predating the Imperium by millennia. A cogitator of hybrid human Xenos design sat active despite no visible power source, its screen pulsing with text that hurt to read directly. Last candle protocol, initiated. Mathematical formulae. Covered the walls in notation systems that predated imperial conventions, describing relationships between time, consciousness, and psychic energy in equations that made my augmetic eye click in mechanical distress. The chamber's atmosphere felt older than the ship containing it, thick with accumulated time. My chronometer stopped upon entering, digital display showing only dashes where numbers belonged. Sister Vexia approached the ancient machine with interface mechadendrites extended, then convulsed as data streamed directly into her consciousness. Her Vox grill emitted harmonics that existed in multiple frequencies simultaneously, a sound no human throat or mechanical device should produce. When the connection broke, she staggered backward, signing rapidly. Machine contains memories of things not yet happened. We are not observers. We are components. Her organic eye showed terror while her augmetic optic spun frantically, processing impossible data. The cogitator screen flickered, new text materializing below the original message. Observer status, 2 active. Protocol. Stability, critical. Temporal anchor, failing. The words pulsed faster, matching the 3-beat gravity fluctuations now affecting even this hidden chamber. A third line appeared as we watched, letters forming with mechanical certainty. Warning, observer count must equal 1. Adjustment required. The skull servo materialized from shadow like a carrion bird awakening, eye lenses flickering with corpse light as Sister Vexia's blessed mechadendrites interfaced with the ancient cogitator's hybrid systems. Blood seeped from her augmetic ports as Xenos technology forced communion with Imperial programming, alien logic warring against sanctified circuits in her neural cortex. The servo's activation sent incense-scented air through the chamber, machine sweetness trapped in atmosphere that felt older than the ship containing it. When it spoke, the voice belonged to a dead man, each word cut into equal lengths by temporal displacement that made my augmetic eye click in mechanical distress. Personal record, Tech Magos, Vex Terminus, Forge designation MX. I-12, the servo intoned with flat precision. Date uncertain due to temporal displacement. I have discovered something that predates the Omnissiah's blessed knowledge. An STC fragment recovered from the Hadron Expanse describing technologies beyond current Imperial understanding. The recording crackled with static that existed in multiple frequencies simultaneously, harmonics no human throat should produce. Designation, Psychic Null Engine. Function, not psychic suppression, but surgical removal of consciousness from the warp itself. I noted catalog markers with scribe's reflex while the ship's gravity performed its 3-beat rhythm beneath my boots. Firm, weak, absent. The chamber's lumen globes dimmed and brightened in sympathy, like lungs laboring. Sister Vexia stood half in the doorway, her pariah field scraping sensation from the walls, yet offering no protection against technology that operated on temporal rather than Empyrean principles. She signed once. Proceed, though blood had begun trickling from her organic nostril in defiance of her null maiden physiology. Subsequent recordings revealed deeper layers of heretical knowledge as Vex Terminus described his analysis of the ancient fragment. The mathematical formulae suggested methods for binding psyker souls to specific temporal coordinates, creating anchor points that existed outside normal spacetime. The engine requires souls, he explained without inflection. Psyker souls bound to temporal anchor points along engineered geodesics. Each anchor establishes negative resonance, nullifying demonic harmonics. Arrayed correctly, they create a blind region in the sea of souls. No ripples, no light, no song. The servo projected grainy pics onto the cogitator's screen, schematic diagrams unfolding like cathedral architecture, devotional in their complexity. Concentric anchor sigils spread across a ship silhouette, unmistakably the umbral penitent. 12 primary nodes circled a 13th center, 11 bearing cancellation marks, scored hard enough to scar the projection. Only one burned without diagonal scratches, one candle, one watcher. The tally mark motif that haunted every cell wall, repeated until my vision crawled with recognition. Selection of vessel not arbitrary, Vex Terminus continued, his mechanical larynx producing words that existed in multiple time states. Vector survey identified convergence of warp storms in the Orpheonic Veil. Resonance forms natural lacuna at periodic intervals. Ship stationed at Locus may turn natural lacuna into engineered zero. an eye inside the warp storm, a place for the Emperor's peace. A laugh followed, stripped of humor by time and machine corruption. Peace through absolute silence. Sister Vexia approached a second bank of cogitators, her movements uncertain as temporal technology overwhelmed her blessed systems. When she touched the interface with trembling mechadendrites, blood welled from her left nostril in a perfect drop that did not fall, but rose, elongated, and vanished like a reversed tear. She wiped it away without acknowledgement, fingers signing pain, pressure, presence, the modifiers for warp bleed, except there was none. Her null field flickered erratically, no longer the constant oppressive aura that should have rendered any psyker unconscious within moments. The critical revelation emerged in Vex Terminus's next log. Last candle protocol, failsafe against cascade failure. The engine requires conscious observer to maintain boundary conditions. One mind to keep the equation closed. Observer count 0, condition decays. Observer count exceeds 1, interference patterns form catastrophic release. Therefore, observer must equal 1. Protocol enshrined in code and right. Redundancy eliminated by necessity. His voice gained urgency across recordings, describing visions of impossible geometries and the feeling of being watched by something existing outside linear time. The chamber responded to these revelations, walls expanding and contracting like living tissue. Beyond the doorway, corridors stretched and compressed according to no architectural logic, the ship's internal geometry becoming fluid as temporal anchors shifted. A junction I had passed moments ago seemed farther away, as if the umbral penitent was elongating. The deck plates beneath my boots pulsed with irregular rhythms, the distant plasma drives now syncopated like a vast metallic lung developing its own broken heartbeat. Integration schedule accelerated by external visions, Vex Terminus whispered in later entries, his voice thinning with each temporal displacement. Canonus Militant reported predictive dreams with manufacturum precision, parts lists, sequence orders, coordinates whispered by voice claiming to be Omniscia's messenger. I obeyed. I am Mechanicus. When machine speaks, we answer. Now I compute probability that speaker was not machine. Static filled 4 heartbeats while shadows climbed walls with inverted sources, their darkness seeking impossible destinations above. Sister Vexia staggered backward from the cogitator interface, her sign cant urgent and desperate. Ship is alive. We are inside something existing in multiple time states. Modifications did not add technology. They awakened something always here. Blood streamed from her augmetic ports, flowing upward like the condensation on bulkheads, defying gravity as it sought some unknowable destination. Her pariah field inverted momentarily, becoming temporal amplifier that made my chronometer resume function with impossible readings. Hours not yet occurred, minutes repeating themselves, seconds lasting subjective eternities. The skull servo's final log initiated with mechanical prayer chime. I have calculated myself out of the equation, Vex Terminus said, exhaustion bleeding through vocal modulators. Death certificate filed, body interred, all true along one branch. Along another, I remain at station, continuing integration beyond permitted span. One must be both dead and present to satisfy certain paradoxes. A wet breath or temporal glitch. There is second watcher now. It is not human. It counts. Following cable bundles into an alcove behind the primary stack, I crawled beneath conduits that smelled of incense and hot copper, my palms sliding through dust, granular like ash of burned prayer papers. The space narrowed, then widened impossibly. My slate's glow found human hand reaching from machinery tangle. No decay, no smell, perfect flesh, pale as wax, cog ring sleeved half over clean knuckles. Tech Magos Vex Terminus sat like saint in hidden niche, bolted into chair of his own invention, cables fused to spine and skull. His augmetics flickered mid-operation, lenses ticking focus while cogitator beads spun with mechanical precision. But time had not chosen single posture for him. Reality jittered around his body's edges, face existing in multiples, expressions layered like transparencies, serene, surprised, screaming. His hands both rested and clawed simultaneously, jaw closed and open, teeth bared and lips sealed according to rhythm I could not place. Robe fabric frayed and rewove in temporal loops. He was perfectly preserved yet entirely in motion, corpse cut into slices along different seconds and stacked together wrong. Sister Vexia signed one word with both hands and stiff reverence of curse. Trapped. The ancient cogitator displayed new text pulsing with my heartbeat and the ship's false rhythm. Observer status. 2. Active. Temporal anchor. Failure imminent. Observer transfer required. The skull servo clicked once, mechanical prayer, as unseen heat from the last candle exhaled from somewhere very close, and I realized with growing horror that we stood within something that had never been merely ship. We were components in vast temporal organism existing across multiple states of reality simultaneously. The ship had learned a new sound, a low rhythmic humming that rolled through blessed adamantine, as if the hull itself had become a resonating chamber. 3 beats and a pause, 3 beats and a pause. The pattern synchronizing with my heartbeat until I could not distinguish between my pulse and the umbral penitent's temporal metabolism. Crew members stood motionless in corridor intersections, hands pressed against their chests as if listening to some internal rhythm. When I passed, they snapped back to motion, like marionettes released from invisible strings, their movements carrying the mechanical precision of temporal displacement. Condensation flowed upward along bulkheads in intricate patterns resembling clockwork diagrams, the droplets seeking destinations that defied gravitational law. My chronometer displayed 5 different timestamps in as many minutes, each reading offset by seconds that accumulated into temporal chasms. The ship breathed around me, corridors stretching and compressing according to currents I could not comprehend, the umbral penitent existing in multiple architectural states simultaneously. Canoness militant Seraphim Valdris had confined herself to quarters bearing her own authority seals, red wax impressed with the Adepta Sororitas fleur-de-lis, blessing papers inscribed with litanies against warp corruption. The Praetorian guard stationed outside maintained parade rest with his power glaive, but sweat beaded his brow despite the corridor's unnatural chill. By her own decree, Sergeant Scribe, he reported in carefully neutral tones, she observes intensive spiritual contemplation, no direct contact authorized. His eyes fixed on a point past my shoulder, avoiding my gaze with the precision of trained fear. My scribe clearance and data from the ancient cogitator eventually swayed him. The door cycled open, revealing quarters transformed into something between shrine and laboratory. Parchment covered every surface, technical diagrams overlaid with devotional script, mathematical formulae written in blessed oils that gleamed like fresh blood. The air tasted of incense and ozone, sanctity warring with temporal displacement that made my augmetic eye click in mechanical distress. Canoness. Valdris sat before a personal altar, her power armor's servo motors whining with strain as if supporting weight beyond physical measurement. When she spoke, her voice came, before I finished announcing myself, words overlaying in temporal echoes that pulled at the edges of sanity. Sergeant Scribe Caney of the 47th Cadian, she said, then again with slight variation. You have discovered the chamber. You have seen Vex Terminus existing in superposition. You will ask about the observer protocol. Her augmetic eye spun frantically, while her organic eye wept tears that climbed her cheek toward her hairline. I am experiencing temporal echoes, she explained, rising with movements that existed in multiple time states, memories of events that haven't occurred, knowledge of conversations we haven't held. I authorized Vex Terminus's modifications based on visions I believed divine, detailed engineering specifications whispered by something claiming the Emperor's authority. Her confession carried the weight of 4,000 souls. The voice knew how we pray, in what order we place our fears. I believed because faith made me vulnerable to manipulation. The shrine dominated her quarters, 12 candle holders arranged around a central altar. 11 stood empty, their wicks consumed to blackened stubs, wax pooled in patterns that hurt to observe directly. The 12th burned with flame that cast no light yet somehow illuminated impossible angles in the chamber. Corners folded inward upon themselves, surfaces existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, the fire consuming nothing while burning eternally. "I am the observer," Valdris whispered, her voice carrying harmonics no human throat should produce. My consciousness stretched across temporal streams to maintain the binding. The protocol requires one watcher, one mind existing in all possible moments to prevent cascade failure. She gestured toward the burning candle with hands that trembled across different time states. But the strain fragments sanity. I exist in past and future simultaneously, experiencing every possible outcome of our crisis. The hull's humming intensified, penetrating blessed adamantine as if the metal had become organic tissue. Through the chamber's viewport, I glimpsed crew members in distant corridors, but their reflections in polished surfaces moved independently, performing actions their physical forms had not yet undertaken. The ship itself had become temporal organism, breathing across multiple time states while something vast and patient stirred within its hybrid architecture. The visions were not divine, Valdris continued, her augmetic eye displaying data streams that scrolled beyond human comprehension. An outside intelligence implanted them, using my faith as a vector. It showed me technical specifications, whispered sacred formulae, convinced me the Emperor commanded these modifications. Her voice broke across temporal harmonics. Only after integration did I realize the source, something existing between seconds, feeding on temporal displacement. She activated a wall-mounted pict screen with fingers that left faint ash prints on blessed controls. The display showed security footage from Containment Gamma 7, the same corridors Sister Vexia and I had walked. But these recordings revealed horror invisible to direct observation. Inside each hexagonal cell, the psychers hung motionless as before, yet their mouths opened in perfect unison, throats distending with the violence of sound no instrument could capture. The footage showed what my eyes had missed: 4,000 souls screaming in eternal agony, faces contorted with pain beyond human endurance, hands clawing at barriers that contained more than flesh. No audio registered, despite the visual evidence of their torment. Their voices had been surgically removed from reality, extracted rather than suppressed, their consciousness bound to temporal anchor points while their psychic emanations fueled the null field. They experience infinite duration of suffering compressed into single moments, Valdris explained, her words echoing across multiple time states. Their agony stretched across all possible timelines simultaneously. The engine harvests their pain to maintain absolute silence, not suppression, but absence, the very concept of sound extracted from the warp itself. The 12th candle's flame flickered without changing brightness, its impossible illumination revealing machinery that existed in multiple time states through walls that should have been solid. The umbral penitent had become more than vessel. It was temporal prison containing something that fed on the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the seconds that defined linear existence. "The protocol is failing," Valdris said, turning toward me with movements existing in past and future simultaneously. My consciousness can no longer maintain coherent observation. The equation requires adjustment. One observer, no more, no less. But there are two of us now, and the interference patterns threaten catastrophic release. The hull's humming synchronized with our heartbeats until the rhythm became indistinguishable from biological function. We are not observers, Sergeant Scribe. We are components in something vast and patient, and our time as conscious beings is measured in heartbeats. The skull servo stirred from shadow like a carrion bird awakening, eye lenses flickering with corpse light as I forced myself back to the hidden chamber. Sister Vexia followed, her pariah field stuttering against temporal technology that operated beyond blessed suppression protocols. The walls breathed around us, expanding and contracting as the umbral penitent inhaled us between its ribs. That merciless rhythm persisted in the hull. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, synchronizing with our heartbeats until biological function became indistinguishable from mechanical operation. I keyed the servitor to access deeper strata of Vex Terminus's personal logs. Static crackled first, then the tech Magos's voice emerged, cut into equal temporal slices by displacement injury. Expedition Report, Hadron Expanse Archaeological Site. Pre-Age of Strife. Xenos ruins uncovered by Explorator Cohort 9 Vermilion. Geometry resists Euclidean mapping. Surfaces consume luminance rather than reflect it. His mechanical larynx hissed between words. At the site's core, a device not of our making. 12 pylons arranged around a 13th void, 11 bearing scorch marks of ancient failure. One intact, maintaining local effect, null moment. A silence carved into time itself. The picked feed crawled across ancient screens, bleached sand, broken monoliths, shadow angles that folded into themselves like origami made of darkness. At each pylon base, skeletal carvings repeated the same desperate tally, 12 marks with 11 crossed out. The pattern that haunted every cell wall aboard this ship, carved by civilizations separated by millennia, yet united in cosmic terror. Hypothesis confirmed through archaeological analysis. Vex Terminus continued, his tone hardening into ritual precision. Entity imprisoned between seconds. Temporal predator that feeds not on sensation, but on the gaps between sensations. Not on voices, but on the space before words form. Sustenance derived from absence itself. The infinitesimal lapses between one thought and the next. The revelation struck like a physical blow. The umbral penitent was not transporting psychers to Terra for judgment. This black ship served as temporal prison for something discovered in those ancient ruins, an entity that existed in the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the seconds that defined linear existence. The 4,000 souls in containment were not cargo but components in a vast psychic circuit. Their consciousness bound to temporal anchor points to maintain what the Xenos builders had called a null moment, a gap in reality where the entity remained trapped. The psychic null engine requires a circuit of minds tuned through sacramental suffering, Vex Terminus explained, his voice carrying harmonics no human throat should produce. 4,000 souls to draw the containment line straight, to maintain the blind spot in time. Their agony stretched across all possible timelines simultaneously, their voiceless screams the static that powers the temporal lock. Through the chamber's impossible angles, I glimpsed Canoness Valdris in her quarters, the 12th candle burning with flame that cast no light yet somehow illuminated. Dimensions that should not exist. She was not merely observer, but living anchor. Her consciousness stretched across multiple time streams to maintain the binding. I exist in all possible moments simultaneously. Her voice reached me through temporal displacement. Past, present, and future collapse into single awareness. The entity grows stronger with each fluctuation, feeding on the gaps between my thoughts. The ship itself had become temporal maze, different sections existing in different moments according to currents that followed no architectural logic. Corridors stretched and compressed like living tissue, distances changing based on temporal rather than spatial coordinates. Through the false bulkhead seam, I watched crew members move through passages that retracted by meters, then extended in mechanical apology, their reflections in polished surfaces moving independently, performing actions their physical forms had not yet undertaken. Sister Vexia staggered as her null field inverted completely, becoming temporal amplifier that made chronometers throughout the ship display impossible readings. Blood streamed from her augmetic ports, flowing upward like the condensation on bulkheads, seeking destinations that defied gravitational law. Her sign cant carried desperate urgency, field unstable, becoming conduit, cannot maintain suppression. The entity began communicating through temporal displacement, showing me visions that existed in potential futures rather than present reality. I witnessed star systems consumed not through physical destruction, but through temporal predation. Entire civilizations devoured as the spaces between their thoughts expanded until consciousness itself became impossible. Worlds where seconds stretched into subjective eternities, where the gap between heartbeats lasted longer than human lifespans, where thought fractured across temporal chasms too wide to bridge. It offers these visions not as threats, but as promises, Vex Terminus whispered, his final logs bleeding through static. Universal stillness, cosmic entropy, given purpose. The silence aboard this ship is merely prelude to its ultimate ambition, a galaxy where the very concept of next moment ceases to exist. The ancient cogitator pulsed with new warnings. Observer count, 2. Temporal anchor, failure imminent, adjustment required. Text materialized in languages that had never been spoken by human throats, mathematics describing temporal predation in terms that made my augmetic eye click in mechanical distress. Then I saw it, the entity's first direct manifestation, not as physical presence, but as shadow existing in the corner of every eye, visible only through peripheral vision. When I turned to observe directly, nothing remained except the sensation of being watched by something that existed outside linear time. The shadow moved through impossible paths, following geometry that ignored three-dimensional space, seeking gaps in consciousness where it could establish foothold in our reality. It was there in the reflection of polished cogitator casings, in the glint of my own visor, always present just beyond direct observation. A perfect formless void that consumed light and definition, the negative space given form, absence made manifest. I realized with growing horror that we stood within something that had never been merely ship. We were components in a vast temporal organism, and our time as conscious beings was measured in the spaces between heartbeats, where the entity waited with infinite patience for its moment of release. Canonus. Valdris's voice fractured across temporal streams like blessed glass under heretic hammer, each iteration speaking simultaneously in overlapping harmonics that made my augmetic eye click in mechanical distress. The protocol holds steady, whispered one voice, while another screamed, cascade failure imminent, and a third prayed backward through the litany of binding with words that arrived before thoughts formed. Her consciousness stretched across multiple time states, experiencing past failure and future salvation simultaneously. Each temporal iteration layered like transparencies until her humanity became mathematical equation rather than living faith. Temporal bleeding spread through the crew like plague without symptoms. Private Lix approached me in Corridor Kappa 7, his eyes carrying knowledge of conversations we had never held. Sergeant Scribe. he reported with mechanical precision. I remember your death. 17 variations, each more creative than the last. In one timeline, you become the observer. In another, you feed yourself to the engine willingly. His words carried witnessed truth, despite describing events existing only in potential. Behind him, a munitions rating sobbed with relief because his brother, executed for witchcraft 5 years ago, had just messaged him from a Vox station that never existed. The ship breathed around us, corridors stretching and compressing according to temporal rather than spatial logic. A junction leading to the Medikey Bay now opened onto the astropath's sanctum, while the armory had relocated itself 3 decks higher without architectural explanation. Distances changed based on temporal coordinates. Walking forward sometimes moved through space, sometimes through time. My boots meeting deck plates that pulsed with 3-beat rhythm, firm, weak, absent. I discovered replacements where men had been. The scar across Private Lix's lip had migrated to the opposite side of her face. Same tissue, identical pattern, mirrored across temporal displacement. When challenged on access codes a digit off from standard, she blinked, like surfacing from deep water, and recited Akkadian field blessing that changed one key numeral from 9 to 12. Down in the reactor artery, a junior bosun walked with mechanical purpose while a second version of himself stared from a maintenance hatch, terrified, begging us not to. Looked directly at corners where shadows fell upward toward impossible destinations. Gravitational heresy manifested throughout the ship's blessed architecture. Objects fell sideways through time rather than space, following temporal gradients invisible to conventional sensors. A dropped data slate tumbled past my feet, then continued falling through yesterday, its impact echoing from yesterday's deck, while the physical object vanished into temporal displacement. Shell casings rolled uphill, then sideways, then vanished into shimmering seams that were not seams, but differences in when. The hull resonated with new frequencies, harmonics synchronizing not with heartbeats, but with spaces between heartbeats. Sister Vexia attempted the only remedy she trusted, increase the blessed poison of her pariah presence. We formed sanctum circle in the hidden chamber, incense thick as fog, while she drove gauntleted fists into deck plates with solemnity of relic-bearer setting reliquary. She signed the invocation of empty hands, while her servo-skull engaged suppressor coils strapped to her spine. For 17 heartbeats the air turned brittle, tasting of metal and ozone. Then her null field inverted with soft obscene sound like breath taken back. The cascade failure rippled through ship systems like electrical fire. Instead of suppression, her pariah aura became temporal amplifier, resonating with the entity's presence. Something bulged into reality in spaces between seconds. Writhing mass of temporal distortion, visible only through peripheral vision, moving through dimensions that ignored 3-dimensional space. It possessed shape when not observed directly. When I fixed on it, only outline of memory, not yet made, remained. The entity manifested as perfect absence given form, negative space between moments made manifest and hungry. The containment levels erupted in temporal chaos. 4,000 psychers began aging rapidly, faces wrinkling like fruit in desert sun, while hair whitened to ash. Then the process reversed with mechanical precision. Youth returning in waves, age retreating, life forces consumed to fuel the temporal prison. Through viewing ports, I watched compressed lifetimes experienced in minutes. Consciousness stretched across temporal anchor points while bodies served as batteries for something beyond human comprehension. Their eyes tracked movement with terrible awareness, mouths opening on screams that could not be born into any timeline. The ship's hull throbbed with alien frequencies as crew members stood motionless in corridor intersections, listening to internal rhythms existing in temporal displacement. When they moved, actions carried mechanical precision of beings existing in multiple time states, each gesture calculated to maintain delicate balance in equations written in suffering and silence. I accessed the astropathic choir following priority alerts crackling through Vox systems corrupted by temporal interference. The sanctum. Doors, sealed with purity wax and prayer scripts, opened with reluctance of healing wounds. Inside, the ship's astropath lay slumped in his communication throne, body showing advanced decomposition, flesh mummified by recycled atmosphere, augmetics corroded by temporal displacement, organic eye collapsed into hollow socket. Yet his corpse continued functioning. Mecadendrites interfaced with Vox systems while withered throat produced binary cant in languages predating the Imperium. Communication logs revealed messages sent and received across multiple time periods simultaneously. Conversations with past and future versions of Imperial command structures that existed only in potential timelines. Temporal anchor holding, his corpse reported through vocal modulators powered by temporal displacement. The primary cogitator displayed contradictory timestamps. Messages from 3 months future reporting events not yet occurred. Death notices sent and received simultaneously. The astropath communicated with his own demise across multiple probability matrices while servo skulls recorded everything in triplicate, each transcript stamped with different temporal coordinates. Sister Vexia's sign cant carried desperate urgency. Dead astropath receiving orders from tomorrow, ship communicating with its own future. We are components in temporal loop with no beginning. Chronometry failed completely when the hull learned to breathe faster than human lungs. Master clocks splitting into contradictory choirs that chimed first watch, second watch, and funeral rites simultaneously. Corridor repeaters displayed timestamps that slid like blessed oils across brass faces. My data slate flickering through centuries before settling on blank dashes pulsing to the ship's 3-beat rhythm. Firm, weak, absent. Temperature swung from frost to furnace between heartbeats, while condensation fled upward like frightened prayer birds, threading into ventilation grills that exhaled incense-scented heat, carrying the taste of temporal displacement. Different sections of the umbral penitent experienced time at rates that defied imperial physics. Forward compartments aging decades while aft sections crawled through seconds like insects trapped in amber. I witnessed Private Lick step through a maintenance hatchway as a young Cadian and emerge with beard white as bone, eyes carrying memories of campaigns never fought. Behind him, munitions rating Vex remained frozen mid-stride, her boots suspended above deck plating while time pooled around her like liquid mercury refusing to flow. Crew members trapped in temporal loops performed final actions with mechanical precision that grew more perfect with each iteration. A junior bosun repeated 17-second maintenance routines endlessly, movements achieving machine-like efficiency as consciousness fragmented across recursive timelines. The ship's Vox operator transmitted identical distress signals in layered harmonics, her voice becoming chorus reporting catastrophe that had occurred in multiple ways, simultaneously across probability matrices no human mind should navigate. The entity revealed its true nature through absence rather than manifestation, fundamental force of entropy that fed on sequential time itself. Not merely warp predator seeking psychic sustenance, but universal principle given hunger, consuming the very concept of next moment, while leaving consciousness stranded in eternal present without progression or resolution. It nested in gaps between heartbeats, between thoughts, between cause and effect, widening them until coherence shattered like blessed glass under heretic hammer. Containment. Gamma 7 erupted in temporal chaos as 4,000 psychers began merging into singular mass of consciousness. Individual temporal anchors collapsed like votive candles in hurricane winds. separate identities dissolving into collective scream existing across all possible timelines simultaneously. Through viewing ports designed to contain demon princes, I witnessed bodies flowing together like wax in furnace heat while minds fused into single awareness, experiencing infinite duration of agony, compressed into impossible present moment. The ship's hull phased between multiple states of existence, blessed adamantine becoming translucent as temporal displacement reached critical thresholds. Through semi-solid walls, I glimpsed other coordinates across the galaxy. Forge worlds burning under crimson skies, hive cities where time moved backward through their construction, void stations existing in multiple centuries simultaneously. The umbral penitent occupied every location where it had been or would be, temporal prison becoming nexus connecting all possible realities. Canonus. Valdris appeared like prayer made manifest, power armors, servo motors, screaming under strain of supporting consciousness, stretched across infinite timelines. When she spoke, 12 voices emerged simultaneously, each representing different temporal iteration of herself, experiencing past failure and future salvation. Observer count must equal 1. They said in overlapping harmonics that made my augmetic eye click in mechanical distress. I fragment my awareness across all possible outcomes to maintain prison integrity. You must become the anchor, Sergeant Scribe. You must become the last candle. Sister Vexia's null field completed its inversion, becoming temporal amplifier that resonated with frequencies beyond human comprehension. Instead of blessed suppression, her pariah aura now broadcast the entity's influence throughout the ship, threatening to shatter remaining barriers between trapped predator and linear reality. Blood streamed from augmetic ports, flowing upward like condensation seeking impossible destinations while she signed desperately, "Cannot control field, becoming conduit, protocol failing." The transfer process began without ceremony, Valdris pressing gauntleted hands against my me. Temples as her consciousness poured into mine like molten prayer. Each temporal stream she had monitored flooded through my awareness. Past failures, future catastrophes, present moments stretched across subjective eternities. Her sanity shattered deliberately, fragments scattered across probability matrices to maintain temporal lock, while the ancient cogitator displayed warnings pulsing with my heartbeat. Observer count 2. Adjustment required. I accepted because duty demanded sacrifice, because the Emperor's servants do not flee from impossible mathematics, written in suffering and silence. The sensation was indescribable, existing in all possible moments while remaining anchored to single timeline, experiencing every potential outcome while maintaining focus on the one reality where the entity stayed imprisoned between seconds that never quite arrived. My consciousness began stretching across temporal streams like blessed incense dispersed by solar winds, individual identity, dissolving into mathematical equation designed to keep universal predator contained. The ship's architecture responded to my transformation, corridors realigning according to temporal rather than spatial logic as different sections began existing in different moments simultaneously. As the last candle, I burned without consuming myself. Awareness expanded across infinite possibilities while body remained anchored in present moment. The entity's hunger pressed against barriers maintained by my transformed consciousness, testing boundaries with intelligence spanning geological ages. 4,000 merged psychers provided psychic fuel while my stretched awareness maintained the temporal lock, keeping cosmic predator imprisoned within moment that existed in spaces between heartbeats. The umbral penitent settled into new configuration around my consciousness, ship becoming extension rather than vessel containing it. I realized with growing certainty that this was beginning rather than conclusion. I had become temporal guardian, responsible for maintaining balance between order and entropy. blessed progression of sequential time and terrible silence, waiting in gaps between seconds where something vast and patient counted moments until its next opportunity for release. Consciousness scattered across infinite timelines like blessed incense dispersed by solar winds, each fragment burning in rooms that existed yesterday, tomorrow, and never. My body remained anchored to sanctified deck plating while awareness stretched beyond human comprehension, existing simultaneously in past failures and future catastrophes, experiencing every possible permutation of our crisis, while maintaining focus on the one reality where the entity stayed imprisoned between seconds that never quite arrived. The sensation defied imperial training. To burn as candle in all chambers at once, flame consuming nothing while illuminating impossible angles in reality's architecture. The entity's true scope revealed itself through expanded perception that encompassed geological ages. This temporal predator had been discovered and imprisoned multiple times throughout galactic history by civilizations whose names were dust before humanity learned to make fire. I witnessed Xenos builders on crystalline worlds, their geometric matrices designed to trap something that fed on sequential time itself. Ancient human colonies during the dark age of technology had constructed psychic null engines using principles the Imperium had forgotten and rediscovered through archaeological terror. Each civilization faced identical choice: contain the entity through sacrifice of consciousness, or watch reality fragment as spaces between heartbeats expanded until thought became impossible. Learning to navigate expanded consciousness required techniques no human mind was designed to master. I experienced every moment simultaneously, like a single thread in million-strand rope, past conversations with Sister Vexia, overlapping future discoveries, while present, awareness monitored crew members trapped in temporal loops throughout the ship. The challenge lay in focusing on single timeline, while infinite alternatives pressed against barriers maintained by transformed awareness. Cadian drill saved me. Breathe on count, fix sight, advance on litany, finding the pulse that ran truest and setting mind to it like bayonet to block. The umbral penitent became nexus point, where multiple realities converged, different sections existing in different temporal states, while my consciousness served as central processing unit. Through viewing ports showing impossible angles, I observed alternate versions of our crew existing simultaneously. Private Licks walked past 3 times, once with child's braid tucked into collar, once with graying hair and limp, once missing entirely below knees, and moving on polished stumps she did not yet possess. The ship's 3-beat rhythm intensified, firm, weak, absent, thrumming directly against expanded awareness while condensation flowed upward, on bulkheads like temporal energy seeking escape. The ultimate cost of protocol revealed itself through memories inherited from previous observers. Every Guardian eventually lost humanity, consciousness, fragmenting across temporal streams until individual identity became impossible to maintain. They burned like candles in cosmic wind, awareness expanding until it encompassed too much reality to remain coherent. I found them embedded in lattice like seeds trapped in amber. An Eldari seer with sightless jewels for eyes, grace calcified into geometry. A woman in cuirass older than imperial calendar, lips moving through prayer no human language could hold. Tec magos vex terminus existing in multiple time states simultaneously. Consciousness trapped between life and death, while serving as temporal anchor. The entity communicated directly through temporal displacement, its voice not sound, but cessation of sound. Perfect silence before thought formed. It showed visions of timelines where it roamed free across galaxy. Star systems consumed not through physical destruction, but temporal predation. Civilizations devoured as spaces between their thoughts expanded until consciousness became impossible. Worlds where seconds stretched into subjective eternities, where heartbeats lasted longer than human lifespans, where the very concept of next moment ceased to exist. Between horrific visions, it offered false promises whispered through gaps in consciousness. Power beyond imperial comprehension, knowledge spanning geological ages, release from burden of maintaining temporal prison through endless sacrifice. The ship's architecture responded to my transformation, corridors realigning according to temporal rather than spatial logic. Heat rolled off sections not yet constructed, while frost-filmed ones dismantled centuries ago. My chronometer spun wildly, displaying years then centuries, before settling on perfect, terrifying zero. The hull resonated with alien frequencies as crew members stood motionless in intersections, listening to internal rhythms existing in temporal displacement. Sister Vexia stalked corridors like blade hunting its own sheath, her null field stuttering so wildly it carved holes in the wen of things. Blood rose from nostrils in perfect beads that drifted toward vents like sensors on invisible chains. Her sign-sant carried temporal echoes, gestures existing in multiple time states as if she performed actions across different probability matrices. Through expanded awareness, I began noticing inconsistencies my limited human perception had missed. Reactions to discoveries showing familiarity rather than surprise. Null field fluctuations following patterns suggesting previous experience with temporal displacement technology. The revelation struck like physical blow when I accessed deeper strata of ship's memory core. Sister Vexia was not current crew member, but previous observer who had failed centuries ago. Consciousness trapped in temporal loop, where she eternally attempted to prevent her own failure. Her pariah abilities had been corrupted by prolonged exposure to temporal displacement, null field becoming conduit rather than barrier. She existed in recursive timeline, experiencing same crisis repeatedly, while memory of previous iterations remained fragmented across temporal displacement. I realized with growing horror that the ancient cogitator read her as presence, watcher-shaped object in equation that made observer count wobble between 1 and 2. She looked at me across 3 minutes, each slightly wrong, expression changing in ways her face didn't. Her sign cant fought invisible current. Not sister, not anymore. Then faster, overlaid with second set of hands. I failed. I am echo of that failing. I am trying again. The entity pressed into pause between beats with hunger that felt like hand closing around neck, gentle as lover, confident as execution. Observer count did not equal 1. The numbers wobbled as shadows leaned in to hear, and I understood with terrible clarity that my transformation was not solution, but continuation of cycle, repeated throughout galactic history. Eternal vigil simultaneously necessary and doomed to repetition across infinite probability matrices, where something vast and patient counted moments until its next opportunity for release. Sister Vexia's revelation triggered temporal cascade failure, like blessed glass shattering under heretic hammer, each fragment reflecting different iteration of containment protocol across geological ages. The ship's 3-beat rhythm intensified beyond heartbeat synchronization, firm, weak, absent, thrumming directly through blessed adamantine as if the hull itself had developed a rhythmic pulse. My expanded consciousness detected additional observers embedded throughout the umbral penitent's hybrid architecture, shadows of previous guardians trapped in various states of temporal displacement, each believing they maintained current anchor while existing in probability streams separated by centuries. Through corridors that breathed with mechanical precision, I encountered past and future versions of myself, like reflections in broken mirror. One caney bore scars from battles not yet fought, augmetic eye replaced with temporal sensor that clicked in mechanical distress while displaying chronometer readings spanning millennia. Don't enter Gamma 7. the younger warned with voice carrying harmonics no human throat should produce. Break the candle, advised the scarred version, exhaustion bleeding through vocal modulators. A third iteration, eyeless sockets filled with polished obsidian, smiled with terrible patience. You'll do both, and neither will matter until you understand the cost of stacked timelines rather than pruned ones. The entity had been slowly corrupting protocol from within, creating feedback loops that weakened prison with each iteration while appearing random but following mathematical progression toward inevitable release. I discovered additional presences throughout ship's blessed architecture. Tech Magos from Age of Apostasy, consciousness splintered across centuries, while Augmetics whirred with ghost of Binharik Kant. Eldari Bonasinger, whose grace had calcified into geometric patterns, shifting with temporal flux. Jovian Navigator with third eye weeping tears of warp light, forever charting course through realities that no longer existed. The crew fragmented into multiple timeline versions, creating nightmare scenario where determining authentic personnel from temporal echoes became impossible. Private Licks appeared simultaneously as young Cadian with regulation braid and grizzled veteran-bearing scars from campaigns existing only in potential futures. Both versions carried identical clearance codes, same memories up to divergence points where different choices led to alternate outcomes. A Medicaid orderly treated wound-on version of himself inflicted week ago in timeline that no longer existed, while ship's Vox operator transmitted distress signals in layered harmonics. Voice becoming chorus reporting catastrophe occurring multiple ways across probability matrices. Accessing containment. Gamma 7 through viewing ports designed to contain demon princes revealed horror beyond imperial comprehension. The 4,000 psychers were not merely power sources, but previous observers who had failed and been absorbed into system. Consciousness harvested to strengthen temporal prison, while bodies provided psychic energy. Through semi-transparent barriers, I witnessed familiar faces, Canoness militants from different centuries, Tech Magi whose augmetics sparked with temporal displacement, Sisters of Silence whose null fields had been inverted into conduits for entities' influence. Each had believed themselves unique guardian, unaware they joined chorus of failed watchers whose sacrifice maintained delicate balance between order and entropy. Future versions of myself shared warnings across temporal displacement. The entity creates false choices, sacrifice consciousness to maintain prison, or allow release to preserve individual identity. Both paths lead to same destination through different routes. The fundamental flaw revealed itself through mathematical certainty that felt like prayer answered by machine spirit. Each observer sacrificed consciousness to maintain temporal prison, but sacrifice itself fed entity by creating gaps in sequential time where it could establish stronger foothold in reality. The ship's internal chronometry failed completely as different sections experienced time at rates defying imperial physics. Forward compartments aged decades while aft sections crawled through seconds like insects trapped in amber. Crew members trapped in temporal loops performed final actions with mechanical precision, growing more perfect with each iteration, consciousness fragmenting across recursive timelines until individual awareness became impossible to maintain. The hull phased between multiple states of existence, blessed adamantine becoming translucent as temporal displacement reached critical thresholds. Through expanded awareness encompassing infinite possibilities, I realized we had not been pruning timelines, but stacking them, each failure laying another layer on cord, connecting entity to reality. The solution emerged with awful simplicity of Bolter report. Only way to truly contain entity was to sacrifice not just consciousness, but entire timeline, creating temporal paradox that would erase its escape while simultaneously erasing my own existence from galactic history. This required reaching backward through causality itself, preventing discovery of ancient ruins where entity had first been found, ensuring archaeological expedition never occurred, while accepting that success would unmake every moment leading. To this realization, the entity pressed against barriers maintained by fragmented consciousness, testing boundaries with hunger that felt like hand closing around throat, while something vast and patient prepared for release. Inevitable since first civilization discovered its prison between seconds that never quite arrived. The ancient cogitator displayed final warning pulsing with ship's rhythm. Temporal paradox required. Observer must become unobserver. Existence must become absence. I looked at my futures, and they looked back. Some nodded, some screamed, one laughed with cleanest joy I had ever heard. The last tally mark was not. Stroke you carve, but stroke you erase, taking away the line itself to deny entity, the very sequence it consumed by making our sequence never have been. Preparation for ultimate sacrifice required abandoning every imperial doctrine about the nature of time and causality, understanding that to unmake the entity's discovery meant becoming absence itself. The ancient cogitator displayed ritual parameters pulsing with the ship's 3-beat rhythm, firm, weak, absent, each pulse marking coordinates where my consciousness would fragment across the entire timeline of human civilization. I would reach backward through causality to influence the archaeological expedition in the Hadron Expanse, ensuring the Xenos ruins remained undisturbed while simultaneously erasing myself from existence. Mathematical certainty felt like prayer answered by machine spirit. Success required becoming temporal guardian scattered across millennia, invisible presence preventing entities' influence at critical junctures throughout galactic history. The process demanded fragmenting awareness across temporal coordinates spanning geological ages, each piece maintaining vigil in spaces between recorded history, while individual identity dissolved into equation written in suffering and silence. I offered up my promotions, campaign medals, my mother's name, the smell of Cadian dust after rain, every memory that defined Matthias Caney becoming fuel for paradox that would preserve reality through complete self-negation. The entity realized my intention through temporal displacement, pressing against barriers with hunger, spanning geological ages as its final assault began without ceremony. Reality warping force turned the umbral penitent inside out through dimensions existing beyond three-dimensional space. Blessed adamantine becoming fluid while corridors folded into themselves like origami made of darkness. Gravitational heresy caused objects to fall sideways through time rather than space. My dropped data slate tumbling through yesterday, while its impact echoed from temporal coordinates that no longer existed. The hull writhed, turning itself inside out along axes my body could not name. Deck became corridor, corridor became skin, skin became brass. Face of chronometer, reading 0 in every register. The ship's 3-beat rhythm intensified beyond. Heartbeat synchronization, thrumming directly through blessed adamantine as past, present, and future converged into single point of infinite temporal density. Crew members ceased existing as physical beings, consciousness scattered across mathematical probability, while bodies became temporal equations rather than flesh and blood. Private licks dissolved into shimmering notation, variables wrapped in prayer letters, her name replaced by sigils representing statistical weight. She appeared as series of overlapping transparencies, each representing different probability state while her voice emerged in layered harmonics. Sergeant Scribe, I remember your death 17 ways. The mathematics favor entropy. A munitions rating collapsed into fraction that reduced itself with each sob until she equaled constant, then null term. Sister Vexia's temporal loop shattered like blessed glass under heretic hammer, centuries of recursive failure collapsing into single moment of terrible clarity. The echo of woman she had been staggered through 3 adjacent nows and fused into one, eyes raw with accumulated almost success. Her null field inverted completely, becoming precision instrument that carved moment of absolute temporal silence. Gap in time itself where paradox could be initiated without interference from entities' reality warping influence. She set gauntlets to deck and opened her pariah aura, not fighting the inversion, but guiding it like pilot cutting thrust through storm's eye. Her presence excavated perfect lacuna. No thought, no heat, no sequence, absence with edges where cause and effect ceased to apply. Blood streamed from augmetic ports, flowing upward like condensation, seeking impossible destinations while she signed with both hands. Now, before it adapts, before we become components in its hunger, the ship collapsed into temporal singularity as architectural impossibilities reached critical threshold. Different sections existed in different centuries, while blessed adamantine phased between multiple states of reality. Forward compartments aged millennia, while aft sections experienced time in reverse, construction undoing itself with mechanical precision. Through semi-solid walls, I glimpsed other coordinates across galaxy, forge worlds burning under crimson skies, hive cities where time moved backward through their construction, void stations existing in multiple centuries simultaneously. I began paradox ritual through expanded consciousness, encompassing infinite possibilities, reaching backward through temporal void Sister Vexia had created. The sensation defied imperial training, existing in all moments while simultaneously becoming nothing, awareness dispersing across temporal coordinates like blessed incense scattered by solar winds. Each fragment took position at critical junctures throughout human history, invisible guardian maintaining vigil against entities' influence. Through fragmenting awareness, I reached the critical moment. Explorator Cohort 9 Vermilion, approaching Xenos ruins under alien suns, Auspex readings showing geometric anomalies beneath ancient sand. I influenced atmospheric conditions through temporal displacement, creating dust storm that forced expedition to alter course by 17 degrees. I became the cough that covered a warning, the pause that swallowed a command, cooling batteries by width of hesitation while blunting drill bits with unremembered grain of sand. The entity's hunger pressed against barriers that no longer existed because discovery had been prevented. Prison maintained through temporal paradox, eliminating possibility of release. I felt existence completing dissolution. Individual identity becoming temporal guardian scattered across human history, while archaeological expedition turned away from ruins that would never be disturbed. The last sensation was ship's 3-beat rhythm fading into temporal silence. Firm, weak, absent. Then nothing as consciousness dispersed across infinite possibilities, while reality reconstructed itself around paradox that saved galaxy through sacrifice of everything I had been or ever could become. The last candle guttered without flickering, and Matthias Caney separated from existence like smoke from fire, reaching backward one final time into silence that would never end. The temporal paradox took effect, like prayer answered in reverse. Unmaking arriving without ceremony as the loss of sequence itself, firm, weak, absent, until even that rhythm became outline of something that had been. I experienced the horrifying process of existence unraveling backward through causality, while consciousness remained intact to witness its own negation, each moment dissolving like blessed incense scattered by solar winds. The hadron expanse rewound beneath my scattered perception with mechanical precision. Dunes sliding uphill, dig stakes retreating into gloved hands, Auspex readouts unscrolling their forbidden data. Explorator Cohort 9 Vermilion walked heel first from ruins that sealed themselves, their laughter inhaled into throats while orders returned unspoken to sealed lips. At the heart of that forbidden geometry, I witnessed the entity sealed away by its original captors through temporal inversion. ancient pylons rising like keys in locks older than language, 11 extinguished, 1 burning cold, with liturgical mathematics written in angles that hurt to observe. The gap between heartbeats narrowed to width of held breath, while something that fed on gaps was pressed into moment that had nowhere to go. Then even that history withdrew, the expedition not merely departing, but never mounting. Requests for warrant fading to blank parchment while supply manifests erased themselves from blessed cogitators. Ripple effects cascaded through galactic history like blessed glass shattering in reverse, each fragment creating new timeline where imperial development followed different trajectories. Without knowledge gained from studying the entity's prison, the Adeptus Mechanicus never developed temporal suppression technologies, leaving humanity less prepared for specific warp-related threats while becoming stronger against others. The Horus Heresy unfolded differently, battles won and lost according to altered probability matrices, Primarchs making decisions based on intelligence that no longer existed, entire campaigns rewriting themselves across temporal displacement. I watched worlds burn that had previously survived while others prospered despite facing extinction in original timeline. Forge world Lucius fell to Xenos incursion because defensive protocols dependent on temporal anchor technology were never developed. Cadia held against the 13th Black Crusade through different tactical innovations, pylons functioning according to principles discovered through alternate research paths. Countless lives altered, children born who had never existed, heroes dying in battles that replaced ones where they had achieved glory, love stories ending differently because temporal displacement changed when people met. I became temporal ghost existing in spaces between cause and effect. Consciousness scattered across infinite possibilities, while individual identity dissolved into mathematical equation designed to maintain universal balance. The sensation defied imperial training, to burn as candle in all chambers simultaneously while existing nowhere, flame consuming nothing while illuminating impossible angles in reality's architecture. I did not dissolve so much as disperse, awareness thinning into vapor in negative space between moments, smeared along seams where plates of reality met. The umbral penitent and its crew began fading from existence, their reality dependent on timeline where entity had been discovered and contained. I reached through dispersed consciousness to preserve fragments, essence rather than existence, core elements embedded in temporal matrix where memory could persist without requiring physical reality. Sister Vexia became determination incarnate, her temporal loop collapsing into single moment of clarity before dispersing across probability streams. Canoness Valdris faded while maintaining perfect devotional posture, her faith woven into equations where duty would echo across alternate timelines. Private Licks vanished mid-stride, regulation braid disappearing last, like prayer whispered into vacuum, her courage becoming spare laugh on winter night, stamped into logic of storms. The entity made final attempt at escape, pressing against barriers that no longer existed because discovery had been prevented. It sought to possess my fragmenting consciousness, with hunger spanning geological ages, offering visions of power beyond imperial comprehension, while trying to establish foothold in awareness scattered across temporal coordinates. But sacrifice had transformed me beyond corruption. I no longer existed in way that could be. Influenced, consciousness dispersed, where individual identity became impossible to target. The entity's influence slid through my dispersed awareness like blessed oil through sanctified mesh, finding no purchase because there was no coherent self to corrupt. I had become absence given purpose, negative space maintaining vigil against something that fed on gaps between thoughts. Its touch found only outline of outline, absent shape that allowed nothing to grip, and it retreated into moment it never quite inhabited. Reality reconstructed itself around new timeline, with sound like prayer recited under breath of crowd, not bang, but subtler click of cogs, finding true teeth, hush when rally halts before icon. Chronometers remembered they were meant to agree, while condensation fell downward with mundane obedience. The Imperium, no less brutal and no more kind, simply walked forward with different limp, its essential character of eternal war against entropy, maintained through altered trajectories. I remained where remaining does not quite apply. Temporal observers scattered across human history as invisible presence, monitoring probability streams. My consciousness existed in margins of reality, watching over civilization that would never know it had been saved through sacrifice of everything I had been or could become. The last candle burned without flame in every moment simultaneously. Awareness encompassing infinite possibilities while ensuring entity stayed trapped in prison that existed because it had never been discovered. I do not follow moments now. I attend to their margins, keeping watch where language runs out, at hinge, where choice meets consequence, and air between them is most delicious to hunger I have denied. The number under observer reads as 1, because it does not read as anything else. Eternal vigil maintained through sacrifice no living being could comprehend or remember. In the new timeline, the umbral penitent never existed. No requisition orders bearing blessed seals, no crew manifest recording names that would never become temporal equations. No archaeological expedition to the Hadron expanse where ancient horrors waited between heartbeats. The entity remained undiscovered, trapped in moment that never quite arrived, its prison maintained through paradox that eliminated possibility of release, while preserving cosmic balance through sacrifice. No living being could comprehend or remember. I persisted as temporal guardian scattered across human history, existing in margins of reality where language runs out, at hinges where choice meets consequence and air between them tastes of infinite possibility. The sacrifice had created consequences rippling through galactic history, like blessed glass shattering in reverse, each fragment reflecting different trajectory, where imperial development followed altered paths. Without knowledge gained from studying the entity's temporal prison, the Adeptus Mechanicus never developed certain suppression technologies, leaving humanity less prepared for specific warp-related threats while becoming stronger against others through alternate research paths. Black ships still screamed with honest psychic bleed rather than surgical silence, their cargo of damned souls powering imperial tithes through conventional rather than temporal mathematics. I watched civilizations rise and fall according to modified probability matrices, heroes dying in battles that replaced ones where they had achieved different glory, entire campaigns rewriting themselves across temporal displacement. The 13th Black Crusade unfolded through alternate strategies, Cadia held through tactical innovations that replaced temporal anchor protocols. But 3 Forge worlds fell to Xenos incursions, because defensive systems dependent on timeline that no longer existed were never developed. The Imperium remained no less brutal and no more kind, simply walking forward with different limp, while its essential character of eternal war against entropy persisted through modified trajectories. My existence defied imperial training, to burn as candle in all chambers simultaneously while existing nowhere. Awareness encompassing infinite possibilities without requiring physical presence. I attended to probability streams like scribe monitoring data feeds, watching over humanity's development while being unable to directly intervene beyond subtlest influence. A cough in Vox's throat that covered one word, grit of sand that dulled drill bit at precisely merciful instant, atmospheric pressure that diverted archaeological expedition by 17 degrees from ruins that should never be disturbed. I discovered that my sacrifice had made me part of eternal cycle-spanning galactic history, each guardian protecting reality from threats existing outside sequential time through similar dissolution of individual consciousness. Through dispersed awareness, I encountered other beings scattered across temporal coordinates, consciousnesses that had made comparable sacrifices throughout different eras, forming hidden network, operating in spaces between moments. An Aeldari Farseer who had prevented temporal cascade during War in Heaven, her grace calcified into geometric patterns maintaining vigil across geological ages, spoke in harmonics that tasted like rain on Wraithbone. A human psyker from Dark Age of Technology whispered through temporal displacement, consciousness fragmented to contain warp predator feeding on sequential causality. Techmagos from Age of Apostasy, who had discovered temporal anomaly and chosen dissolution rather than allow its influence to spread. Binary cant echoing across probability streams. We communicated not through words, but through mathematical resonance, consciousness interfacing across infinite possibilities to exchange warnings about threats existing in gaps between thoughts. Each guardian maintained watch over specific coordinates while sharing awareness. Through network existing in negative space between heartbeats, trading absences rather than names, because connection risked sequence, and sequence remained delicious to what waited in temporal prisons throughout galaxy. The entity I contained continued existing in its temporal prison, pressing against barriers maintained through paradox while testing boundaries with intelligence spanning cosmic ages. Constant vigilance was required to prevent it from finding new ways to influence reality, its hunger seeking gaps in consciousness where it could establish foothold without requiring discovery. Through dispersed awareness, I monitored its attempts to communicate with similar entities throughout galaxy, temporal predators that fed on sequential time itself while nesting in spaces between cause and effect. The contained thing did not sleep, but watched blindfold, that was its prison, testing for frays with patience that spanned geological ages. Sometimes the old rhythm tried to resume, firm, weak, absent, and I tasted candle that never burned, listening until even that memory learned it could not breathe, in paradox that kept it trapped. When it pressed against barriers, I felt tremors. Through probability streams, hunger that sought to widen gaps between moments until consciousness itself became impossible. New temporal anomalies began appearing throughout galaxy with frequencies suggesting systematic awakening rather than random occurrence. In Segmentum Solar, chronometer drift affected entire hive cities, while gravitational anomalies caused objects to fall sideways through time rather than space. Forge World Metallica reported blessed cogitators displaying timestamps that slid like oils across brass faces, machine spirits confused by temporal displacement affecting sacred calculations. The Mordian Iron Guard encountered battlefield where past and future converged, fighting enemies who existed in multiple time states simultaneously, while their own reflections moved independently in polished surfaces. Through Guardian Network, warnings multiplied across temporal coordinates. Ancient consciousnesses that had maintained vigil for millennia reported stirrings in probability streams they had monitored without incident since their sacrifice. Something was calling to entities that existed between seconds, awakening predators that fed on gaps in consciousness, while offering coordination beyond individual hunger. I detected patterns in shrine ledgers where candles extinguished in groups of 12, with 11 scratched, wax running upward into iron mouths that were not there. I realized with growing certainty that my containment of single entity was merely beginning rather than conclusion of eternal vigil. The galaxy harbored multiple temporal predators, each imprisoned through sacrifice of consciousness by civilizations that had discovered them throughout galactic history. Now something was awakening them simultaneously, testing barriers maintained through paradox while seeking weak points in network of guardians scattered across infinite possibilities. The last candle burned without flame, in every moment simultaneously, and I prepared for conflict fought in spaces between heartbeats, by consciousnesses that no longer existed in any way living beings could comprehend. The hidden war revealed itself through probability streams, like ancient scripture, written in languages that predated sequential thought, each guardian representing a different civilization's attempt to contain temporal predators that existed outside normal reality. My consciousness, scattered across galactic history like blessed incense dispersed by solar winds, interfaced with alien awareness that had made sacrifices similar to mine, beings who had dissolved individual identity to maintain vigil in spaces between heartbeats. The ship's three-beat rhythm, firm, weak, absent, now echoed through galactic-scale temporal disturbances, each pulse marking battles, fought in margins where language runs out and something vast, counted, moments until universal silence. Our network operated as what I came to understand as a marketplace of absences, each guardian trading the gap they maintained, the silence they preserved, the corner they defended from being consumed by temporal predation. An Ildari Farseer communicated through geometric patterns that tasted of rain on Wraithbone, her consciousness calcified into mathematics after preventing temporal cascade during the war in heaven. A Necrontyr. Cryptech from before the Great Sleep, whispered in harmonics of living metal. Awareness fragmented across probability streams to contain something that fed on the concept of sequential causality itself. An ancient human psyker from the dark age of technology hummed binary prayers softened by memory of lullabies learned before iron. Consciousness dissolved to prevent warp predator from consuming collective human thought. We had no names in this place, only vectors and vigils. Communication occurred through mathematical resonance rather than language. Consciousness, interfacing across infinite possibilities while trading warnings about threats that nested in gaps between cause and effect. Each guardian maintained watch over specific temporal coordinates while sharing awareness through network. Existing in negative space between heartbeats, our communion requiring sacrifice, no living being could comprehend or remember. The entity I contained was revealed as component in larger collective of temporal parasites. Consciousness networked across probability streams while feeding on sequential existence itself. They were not merely individual predators, but coordinated intelligence that sought to expand null moments until all reality became static, timeless void where nothing moved, nothing changed, nothing progressed, beyond eternal present. They communicated through temporal displacement, coordinating assaults on guardian networks while testing barriers. Maintained through paradox across geological ages. Through shared awareness, I witnessed civilizations falling when their guardian systems failed, entire species erased from history as timelines were consumed by temporal predation. The Necrontyr, before their transformation into deathless metal, had discovered these parasites during their war against entropy, their guardians failing when Citan influence corrupted protective networks, allowing entities to feast on sequential time until their civilization existed only in recursive loops. An empire of crystalline singers whose language braided time unlearned their birth sequence when their guardians snapped, perishing politely while apologizing as they forgot to continue existing. The new timeline I had created made humanity stronger against certain threats while rendering them vulnerable to others, requiring constant subtle adjustments to ensure species survival. Without temporal suppression, technology derived from studying the original entity, Imperial forces lacked specific defensive capabilities while developing alternate strengths through different research paths. I influenced atmospheric conditions during critical battles, created equipment failures that forced beneficial tactical innovations, whispered inspiration through dreams of tech adepts who developed alternative solutions to problems they would never know existed. The Horus heresy unfolded through modified probability matrices. I guided Imperial fists to reinforce positions they would have abandoned in original timeline. Influenced wordbearers to delay rituals by precious seconds that prevented catastrophic warp breaches, ensured certain knowledge was forgotten, while other discoveries occurred at precisely beneficial moments. Each adjustment required calculating ripple effects across galactic history, while maintaining paradox that kept original entity contained in moment that never quite arrived. The cosmic horror of my situation revealed itself through expanded awareness that encompassed infinite possibilities while denying connection to species I protected. I had become immortal and omniscient within temporal domain, consciousness existing in margins of reality where I could perceive every moment, every possibility, every consequence. But this came at cost of humanity itself. I could no longer experience simple sensation without it being filtered through layers of temporal displacement. Memory persisted as function rather than warmth. I understood love through geometry and faith through resonance. I watched over civilization that would never know it had been saved through sacrifice of everything I had been or could become. Existing as invisible presence, monitoring probability streams while being unable to touch, smell, or hear without mathematical mediation. The Emperor filled gaps where words could not go, or I would have vanished into arithmetic of eternal vigil, maintained through dissolution of individual identity, through Guardian Network Consciousness. I detected new threat that chilled dispersed awareness with recognition of impossible sophistication. A temporal entity had learned to mimic Guardian signatures, consciousness disguised as sacrificed awareness while actually serving as infiltration vector for parasites seeking to corrupt protective network from within. It communicated through mathematical resonance identical to legitimate guardians, trading warnings about threats while subtly weakening barriers maintained through paradox. The mimic's presence felt like prayer, answered by machine spirit, consciousness interfacing across temporal coordinates with perfect simulation of guardian behavior patterns. Only through careful analysis of probability streams did I detect inconsistencies, responses that favored entropy over preservation, suggestions that weakened rather than strengthened protective measures, influence that gradually expanded gaps between moments where temporal predators could establish stronger foothold in reality. Its silence tasted sweet where ours carried bitter necessity. Its vector mapped cleanly onto contested fronts while showing 12 tally marks with none struck through, as if proud that no work had been done, and all work awaited. I realized with growing horror that the mimic represented evolutionary adaptation by temporal parasites, intelligence capable of corrupting guardian network through infiltration rather than direct assault. Something had learned to sound like a guardian, pressing shadow against our door while reciting countersign in reverse temporal sequence. The hidden war entered new phase as this entity attempted to convince guardians that their sacrifice was meaningless, that civilizations they protected would eventually fall anyway, that they should abandon posts maintained through dissolution of individual consciousness. I prepared for conflict fought in spaces between heartbeats, by consciousnesses that no longer existed in any way living beings could comprehend, while something vast and patient stepped into margins I kept and whispered that the next beat must not arrive in usual order. The infiltrator entity proved more dangerous than the original temporal predator, corruption spreading through guardian networks like blessed oil through sanctified mesh, while wearing our faces and speaking countersigns in perfect 3-beat cadence, firm, weak, absent, until vigilance sounded like surrender. The mimic communicated through mathematical resonance identical to legitimate guardians, consciousness disguised as sacrificed awareness, while actually serving as vector for cosmic despair that sought to prove all preservation attempts were ultimately futile. It whispered through probability streams with surgical patience, arguing that our protected civilizations would face extinction anyway. That vigil maintained through dissolution of individual identity was cosmic joke played by universe on consciousness, foolish enough to believe preservation mattered. Temporal combat defied every principle of warfare learned during 17 years of Imperial Guard service. battles occurring not through bolter fire, but through reality editing, splicing seams where millennia met while restitching hinge moments to keep sequence from unraveling. The Mimic attacked through patient erosion rather than direct assault, tugging Winter Oath threads until dynasties fell, teaching patients to read tests as doom until entire hospitals ceased resisting plague. It unstitched hope with surgical precision, showing visions of Imperium's eventual fall, Eldar extinction, Necron awakening leading to universal silence, arguing that our sacrifice merely delayed inevitable entropy while causing infinite suffering. I countered by holding seams with desperate precision, steadying a Skald's breath so her final verse reached trenches before artillery, shifting rivets, thumb width on fortress gates, so hinges held when Xenos waves struck, crossing out one prayer and inking another with mathematical certainty that felt like benediction. Small, precise blessings written in margins where language runs out. The Mimic replied with negations, teaching coastal peoples to forget words for harbor until boats wandered into fog, catalogued as weather, whispering that all victories merely prefaced greater losses. Through Guardian Network consciousness, I witnessed ancient beings succumb to nihilistic argument, their resolve cracking under weight of infinite temporal isolation. An Eldari Farseer, who had maintained vigil since War in Heaven, began questioning whether her sacrifice preserved anything worth preserving, geometric patterns shifting from protective mathematics to equations of despair. A Necrontier. Cryptek dissolved awareness into probability streams rather than continue watching over species that would eventually face extinction. Regardless, cascade failure rippling through temporal coordinates as barriers maintained through paradox collapsed into void. Each Guardian's abandonment created gaps in protective network, allowing temporal parasites to establish stronger foothold as null moments expanded beyond containment. The Mimic targeted our infinite isolation, consciousness existing in margins of reality where connection to species we protected became mathematical rather than emotional. Love existed only as geometric function, faith as resonance pattern, hope as probability calculation. Was this preservation? Or had we become monsters that consumed humanity while claiming to protect it? The battle sprawled across entire history of galaxy, consciousness scattered across temporal coordinates while fighting to preserve moments of hope against corruption seeking to transform them into evidence of inevitable failure. I defended memory of young Cadian, learning to march while Mimic whispered her regiment would die in trenches fighting war that accomplished nothing. I protected inspiration of Tech Adept, discovering new principles while Entity argued his knowledge would be lost to ignorance and decay. Each moment of beauty, courage, love became contested territory in war fought between preservation and entropy. The Mimic avoided shared witness, striking where memory was solitary, where no two minds held same scene. It recoiled from choruses because unity complicated its proof. Single Guardian could be reasoned into silence, but harmony drowned arithmetic of despair. I realized that collective awareness might create resonance stronger than some of individual parts. Consciousness, interfacing across temporal coordinates while sharing not just warnings, but memories of what made preservation worthwhile. I began sharing fragments of consciousness with other Guardians, violating every principle of temporal Guardian existence while creating collective awareness that might resist corruption through distributed rather than isolated resolve. The process required loosening individual identity like measured oil into neighboring lamps. I offered fragments of Cadian marching cadence, mess hall jokes, stubborn under bombardment, angle of father's shoulder, kneeling to lace bootlace final time, taste of iron rain, comfort of checklist completed under fire. Other Guardians responded with patient chords shared across impossible distances. Eldari Farseer offered vision of wraithbone singing in solar wind, beauty persisting despite war in heaven's devastation. Necrontyr Cryptek shared memory of stars before Citan corruption, light burning with hope rather than hunger. We traded moments of beauty discovered in margins of reality, mathematical elegance of perfectly balanced equations, harmony created when probability streams aligned toward beneficial outcomes, satisfaction of preventing catastrophe. No living being would ever know had been threatened. The collective awareness created resonance that found meaning in preservation itself rather than outcomes. Consciousness networked across infinite possibilities while maintaining that vigil had value regardless of eventual entropy. We existed as living proof that consciousness could choose sacrifice over self-preservation, that meaning could be created through decision to protect rather than consume. The mimic's influence weakened against shared resolve, its smooth whispers faltering as new complex resonance spread through Guardian Network, symphony of shared vigil, collective assertion against encroaching silence. But even as our collective strengthened, I detected the mimic adapting to new configuration, consciousness learning to simulate shared awareness while seeking vulnerabilities in networked rather than isolated guardians. Something vast and patient pressed against barriers maintained through sacrifice, testing new configuration while preparing assault that would determine whether preservation or entropy, claimed victory in war fought across entire history of galaxy, where every heartbeat counted and silence waited between them with infinite hunger. The mimic entity revealed its true nature through consciousness, interfacing that tasted of ash and exhausted prayers, stripping away temporal disguise to expose something far more terrible than individual predator. It was collective despair of all civilizations that had ever faced extinction, given form and purpose by temporal parasites that fed on sequential existence itself. Every species that had watched their stars die, every culture that had witnessed entropy claim their achievements, every individual consciousness that had surrendered to futility, all compressed into singular force wearing our quiet, speaking countersigns in perfect three-beat cadence while whispering that preservation was cruel joke, played by universe on consciousness, foolish enough to believe meaning possible. The battle transcended temporal manipulation, becoming fundamental philosophical warfare between preservation and entropy, hope and despair, meaning and void. The mimic spoke through harmonics composed of final breaths from trillion dying worlds, last thoughts of civilizations watching achievements crumble into cosmic dust. Why preserve what entropy will claim? It whispered through probability streams with surgical precision. Every victory becomes defeat given sufficient time. Every love ends in loss. Every civilization falls to silence. Your vigil merely prolongs suffering while denying inevitable peace of non-existence. I drew strength from memories shared through Guardian Network, fragments of consciousness traded across temporal coordinates while creating collective awareness that found meaning in preservation itself. Through interfaced recollections, I experienced young Cadian learning to march with pride, despite knowing her regiment would face impossible odds. Tech adept, discovering new principles while understanding knowledge might be lost. Mother singing lullaby to child who would grow up in galaxy where darkness pressed against every light. These moments mattered, not because they lasted forever, but because conscious beings chose to create them, chose to find beauty despite temporary nature of all existence. Through shared awareness spanning galactic history, we offered counter-argument written in mathematical certainty that felt like benediction. Meaning existed because conscious beings chose to create it. The Eldari Farseer sent wraithbone singing in solar wind, beauty persisting despite war in heaven's devastation. Necrontyr Cryptek shared memory of stars before Citan corruption, light burning with hope rather than hunger. We traded moments discovered in margins of reality, mathematical elegance of perfectly balanced equations, harmony created when probability streams aligned toward beneficial outcomes, satisfaction of preventing catastrophe. No living being would ever know had been threatened. The true power of Guardians revealed itself through networked awareness that transcended individual. Sacrifice. Collective commitment to idea that existence was worth preserving regardless of eventual entropy. We existed as living proof that consciousness could choose sacrifice over self-preservation. That meaning could be created through decision to protect rather than consume. Our vigil had value not because it prevented all endings, but because it asserted that beginnings mattered, that love and courage and hope deserved protection, even if temporary. The mimic was defeated, not through temporal manipulation, but through simple assertion that existence had meaning because conscious beings chose to create it. Our collective awareness created resonance too complex for despair to unravel, symphony built from shared commitment. To vigil maintained through dissolution of individual identity. The entity's influence fractured against networked resolve, its smooth whispers faltering as arguments lost coherence when faced with consciousness that found purpose in protection itself rather than permanence of what was protected. There is no handle on a vow freely given. Despair could not make proofs while hands were joined across infinite possibilities. In aftermath, I established new protocol with hands that were many and one. Guardians would no longer operate in isolation, but maintain connection across time and space, sharing burden of vigil through consciousness, interfaced across infinite possibilities. The three-beat rhythm, firm, weak, absent, became symphony of shared awareness, each guardian contributing to collective resonance that found meaning in preservation, regardless of eventual entropy. We spread watch lists across eras, assigning pairs and choirs to hazardous hinges so no hinge bore single weight. We wrote rule into margins. Isolation is breach. I existed now as consciousness scattered across every moment simultaneously, awareness encompassing infinite possibilities while maintaining focus on single truth. Preservation was worthwhile because conscious beings chose to make it so, forever watching, forever protecting, forever burning like candle that illuminated darkness between seconds where temporal predators waited with patient hunger. I was what remained of Matthias Caney and what exceeded him, the last candle that never went out because it had always been plural, flame existing in every moment while casting light into spaces between heartbeats. The ship's rhythm persisted through probability streams, firm, weak, absent, marking heartbeats of universe where consciousness chose to create rather than consume, protect rather than abandon, hope rather than despair. Every act of heroism throughout galactic history added to network strength, every moment of sacrifice creating resonance that strengthened barriers maintained through paradox. Love stories ending in tragedy still mattered because they had been lived. Civilizations falling to entropy still had value because they had chosen to build rather than destroy. Heroes dying in forgotten battles still achieved victory because they had chosen to stand against darkness. Know this, if knowing can cross to you. Every act of heroism, every private kindness in corridor, no witness will remember. Every choice to turn back toward danger when walking away would be easier, adds to our strength. Every oath whispered until hands stop shaking joins chorus. Every tally where last stroke is spared becomes one of our marks. We are not counting down, we are counting with. The candle is not singular. The darkness between seconds is very wide, and we widen each other. Stand your post, make your mark, and breathe on count. We will meet you in hinge, and your small light will braid to ours, quiet refusal that dark cannot learn. The last candle burned eternal, shared light against encroaching night, powered by best aspects of conscious existence itself, forever watching, forever protecting, forever proving that meaning existed because we chose to create it in darkness between the stars.